Let's do this. So, thanks everyone for joining. My name is Andy Cabasso, and I'm from Postaga. And today I'm going to be talking about how to land guest spots on podcasts. If you have any questions at all during this webinar, you can ask them in the Q&A section, and we'll promise you I'll get to them. You should be seeing my screen now. A thumbs up would let me know that everything is working okay. And we will get going. If anyone can't see, that would also be helpful to know. Just seeing the intro slide, perfect. Okay. And if you can't see the screen for any reason, I recommend refreshing. Yep, okay, perfect. So getting going. This is me, me in the past, I guess. Well, I guess every picture is really a picture of us in the past. My name's Andy Cavasso. I'm a co-founder here at Postaga. In the last 2 or so years, I've been on about between 50 to 60 podcasts. And I also help businesses get booked on podcasts, leveraging the experience that we've had, as well as providing the Postaga platform, which helps you with getting booked on podcasts and finding podcasts and doing all of that outreach. So today, what we're going to be talking about, a few things. First, we're going to talk about why we care about getting guest spots on podcasts. We'll talk about the prospecting process of finding the right relevant podcast to reach out to. We'll talk about the pitch and what you should, and also very importantly, what you should not include. And we'll talk a bit about what to expect from your pitch, and what's going to happen next if you have someone who's interested. We'll talk about some common mistakes, how to actually have a good appearance once you're accepted, and also to ensure that you get asked to be on other podcasts as well. And then at the very end, we will do a Q&A. So first, one thing I want to throw out there, we'll open up a poll. I want to know if you've done any outreach to podcasts in the past. So I'm going to open up the poll here. Options are yes. Oh, no, that's not. Yeah. Well, so the question is wrong, but it's my bad. But the question really should be, have you done any outreach to podcasts? Yes or no, and not now, but I have in the past. Though the prompt question I know says, are you currently doing any cold outreach? So I'm curious about that. I'll leave that open for a few more seconds. And then we'll close this out. If you haven't yet, please fill out the poll. Share with me if you are currently doing any podcast outreach or not. Just helps me kind of tailor this. All right, and let's go in 3, 2, 1, and the poll is now closed. Got about 25% yes, 75% no. Interesting split, and good to know. So thanks for sharing that. So some of the tips I have are going to be basic if you've never done this before, and some of them will absolutely be helpful if you have done podcast outreach before, to help you really hone your process, to also help you get better results. So a few reasons for why we care about podcasts. One kind of important one that I think is interesting or relevant for most people doing this is that it helps you reach a new relevant audience of potential customers or partners. Basically, every time you go on a podcast that's relevant to your target audience, it gets you in front of people who maybe have never heard of you before and could maybe try out your product or service. It increases your brand awareness. One thing in particular that I like about podcasts is that when done right, the podcast outreach has a very high success rate, especially compared to other types of PR or lead generation sort of outreach. And one reason for that is that it's definitely less competitive, but also because when done right, you are providing a ton of value for the podcast host, and you're providing them exactly what they're looking for. Another reason that I like podcasts is if you are just starting out and building your brand, it can be a great way for you to build your credibility and authority, and you can leverage some podcast appearances, in particular if they're on like smaller podcasts, to get you to larger podcasts with a larger audience as well. Beyond that, one benefit that maybe you haven't really thought about is that it can provide you this relationship with a potential partner. Every time I go on a podcast, I'm talking to this host who has talked to dozens or hundreds of other people, and what they're talking about is usually relevant to what I'm doing. And so there are often further collaboration opportunities. They can introduce you to other people they might think you may work well with, but as well, they may be able to introduce you to other podcast hosts that you can speak with. And the last one is that when you get on a podcast and the episode is published, the website that hosts the podcast will usually link to your website in the show notes section, and that is a backlink. And if you care about your website traffic and your organic search rankings, that's a nice little win there as well. One question is, can we get a copy of the slides? Absolutely. After this is over, I will share a copy of the slides in the follow-up materials. Thanks, Dan. So some examples of some success we've seen, and to kind of highlight when done effectively the results you can get. For one particular campaign, we sent 173 emails, got 59 replies, that's 34%. And of those 59 replies, 21 of them got podcast booked. And so that's a 12% win rate from these campaigns. And that's a lot of podcasts to be doing. And that can come from a very honed in, focused campaign. And I'll talk more about how we can get there. So it all starts with prospecting, finding the relevant podcasts that we want to pitch to ask to have us on their podcast. Some things that are very important: we want to make sure that the podcasts that we're reaching out to are still actively publishing episodes. I heard a statistic somewhere that the average life of a podcast is 8 episodes total. So there is a graveyard of podcasts out there that are no longer active, and it doesn't do us any good to spend our time and effort reaching out to podcasts that are not producing any new content. So that's the very first thing. Next thing is you want to find podcasts that have done more than a few episodes. Like in particular, I wouldn't probably reach out to any podcast with under 10 episodes, because they're going to be more early stages. They're not going to be as established. Their audience probably is not going to be that big unless it's from like a large brand that has a new podcast, in which case that might be a good one to reach out to, since they probably don't have as much content. So it's something to think about. But in general, I would probably say it's important that they don't have that many episodes. Well, that they have more than a few episodes out. One poll I want to throw out here is I want to gauge what you think. So a scenario, which one of these podcasts do you think would be most relevant for a digital marketing agency where maybe the CEO wants to be a guest on certain podcasts, and their business mainly focuses on marketing to law firms. So 3 options here: reaching out to a podcast that's focused on digital agencies and running digital agencies, a podcast that's focused on marketing, or a podcast that's focused on uh, lawyers. And I'll open the podcast, the poll right now, and it's open. So please go ahead and drop in your answers for this poll. And I will leave this open for a few more seconds, and then we'll discuss, and I'll share my perspective on this. All right. And I'll leave it open for 5 more seconds. If you have not filled it out yet, the poll should be on your screen. We'll close it out in 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we're closing it out. All right. So what do we think? 9% said digital agency focused podcast, 18% marketing focused podcast, and 73% say lawyer focused podcast. So I'm going to go with the majority here and say a lawyer focused podcast, in particular, because that podcast would be most geared towards the target audience that we want to reach. If I do marketing for lawyers, while I am going to be best able to speak about marketing related topics, I don't want to speak about those marketing topics to an audience of digital agency owners or people interested in marketing or in-house in marketing. I want to speak to potential customers ideally. Now, while you certainly can go on a variety of podcasts, especially like you could go on podcasts focusing on agency owners to talk about growing an agency, and maybe with the perspective of I can do this to maybe build some partnerships potentially. The best use of your time, if you are going for that, like if you want to get potential customers from it, would be focusing on these podcasts that are geared towards your target audience. And so if I focus on a lawyer oriented podcast, they may for one thing, they may not have a ton of content on marketing, since it's not going to be a marketing focused podcast. So you can come in as the expert on lawyer marketing to share your expertise with their audience. But if you're pitching podcasts that are agency oriented or marketing oriented, chances are that the hosts of those podcasts are service providers targeting those audiences as well. So it may be less interesting for them to want to have you on as a guest. If you're reaching out to a digital agency focused podcast, the host probably provides some product or service geared towards agency owners. If you're reaching out to marketing podcasts, most of them are either hosted by marketing related publications or marketing tech companies or marketing agencies themselves. And so is a marketing agency going to want to have another marketing agency on as a guest? Maybe not. So just some thoughts there, making sure that when you're doing your prospecting, you're ultimately thinking about who you're going to be trying to get in front of, not necessarily focusing on the topics of the podcast itself. It's a common mistake that I've seen with people doing prospecting. So that's why I really want to highlight that. As far as pitching goes, I have a pitch that has worked very well for me, and I'm going to share that now. First thing is making sure that with your pitch, you have specific topic ideas. In particular, topic ideas that the host has never covered before. is going to be much more likely to get accepted than a topic that is either very broad or or they've done before, unless you have some new perspective to add to things. So like as an example, if you in the example of, let's say, a digital agency focusing on lawyer marketing, I wouldn't want to pitch a topic like marketing for lawyers because that's very non-specific, and the host is like thinking probably, well, what do I do with this? If the topic is marketing for lawyers, I don't really know what they're going to talk about, and I don't think this is going to be a good bet. But if you were to say something like, oh, I've got this here's a topic idea, using paid ads to generate leads that cost less than $50 per lead, or something like that. I don't know. It's just something that's very specific. The more specific you can be, that is an interesting topic for that audience, is going to be more intriguing to the host. And the more specific you can be, the better. And the host usually can help flesh out, like, all right, if your topic is a little too specific, they might want to broaden it a little bit, but the more specific you can be and tie that into your experience is relevant. And the next point I want to get to is exactly this. Why are you qualified to speak on this topic? And this is something you need to demonstrate in your pitch email. So if you say to someone, hey, I want to suggest me as a podcast guest for you. I want to talk about marketing to law firms. The podcast host wants to know, why are you the right person to talk about this? And so following my pitch section on here's my topic, I want to have a section on here's why I'm qualified to speak on this. And in particular, I'm going to have like bullet points that speak specifically to the topics. So as an example of something that I've done in my pitches before, I've been on podcasts to talk about doing a product hunt launch. And so I've got an episode, like in my pitch, it was, hey, here's some topic ideas. One, pitching or having a number one product of the day on Product Hunt. And then for the experience section, I had a number one product of the day on Product Hunt. Just something like that. But that demonstrates that I have the qualifications to speak to this topic, and I'm not just throwing out random topic ideas to see whatever sticks so that I can get on this podcast. And that's going to be more interesting to the host. One thing is also thinking about is there a perspective that you can bring for the listeners that maybe the host doesn't have? Like what I talked about earlier, the idea of the host has their area of expertise, and if you're reaching out to marketing podcasts, the host is probably someone in marketing who has a certain amount of experience on marketing. But what can you bring to the podcast to share with the listeners based on your own experience? Very important for all of this is making sure that you follow up if you don't get a reply to your first email. You may not get a reply to your first email. If you're getting like a reply rate, let's say of like 10%, that means that 1 in 10 people who get your first email are going to reply to it. So the other 90% of people, we need to follow up with them until we get, well, we need to follow up with them to get another crack at potentially getting this guest spot. And if they reply, no, not interested, then we drop them from the sequence. But if they don't get back to us, let's have a follow up. And in general, for podcasts in particular, I recommend a sequence of around about 3 emails. I don't want to push it too much. I don't want to have a series of 5 to 10 emails or something like that, being like, hey, did you get my last email? Or hey, what do you think? If they don't get back to me after 3 emails, I would just move on. So next, I want to share with you an example pitch. And this is kind of taken from a variant of like what I pitched before. So breaking this down, the subject line that I use is podcast guest question mark. So it's very apparent what I'm looking for. And I don't want to like trick the recipient in any way to get them to open the email uh like it's um if how do I say like in some cases, in some types of emails, you may have like a subject line of like a quick question for you or something like that. And in the email, you're pitching link building or services or something like that. But my experience with podcasts, hosts are often looking for new content actively. Uh, they need content to fill their queues for the week or the month or however often they are publishing new content. So by you providing a for them gift wrapped a topic idea, several topic ideas with your experience, you are making their lives easier. And so with a subject line of podcast guest, it's clear to them what you're asking, what you're gonna be asking for, and it's kind of incumbent on them then to think, all right, well, if I am looking for podcast guests, this can be really, really good for us. So it's going to make it more likely that they check it out. As far as like the opening line goes, one line that I've been using is like, your podcast was recommended to me. So I have a few episodes queued up. I say this rather than saying something to the effect of, I love your podcast, because, well, one, yeah, that's a very big lie. I probably, if I'm doing my prospecting and I'm looking at multiple podcasts, potentially dozens of podcasts, I have not listened to a full episode. And so I don't want to make it seem like I have. But if I have, I would want to have more information there to let them know how much of a fan I am. Anyone who just says, I love your podcast, and then says nothing more about it, really proves to the host that they don't actually love the podcast. And in particular, it's a line they get all the time. I know I've heard podcast hosts joking about it, like, all these people pitching me love my podcast, but haven't mentioned anything from any episodes that we've actually done. So then I have the direct ask of, are you open to a guest slot in the next month or so? Kind of giving a pretty open window there and expressing my interest. And then here are my specific bullet point topics that are unique. And then after that, I'm going to talk about why I would be a good fit here. And so then I've got my experience bullet points that speak to my topic ideas. And that's the basic pitch. And I've for this format, I've just had a lot of success with it. So, tips for pitching, as I mentioned before, don't say I love your podcast. Hosts get that a lot. If you do love their podcast, prove it. Actually, if you have listened to their podcast, flex here and demonstrate. Like, one pitch I got about something in the past was, like if you have a blog and it's has any modicum of popularity, you will get people pitching you, asking for links or guest posts that they can publish on your blog. And often in the pitch, they'll say, I love your blog. And it's like so cliche. But on occasion, I've gotten a pitch where the person says, I love this episode of this podcast that you did, and here's what I learned from it, or something like that. And that showed me, wow, they actually listened to an episode. So they spent some time on this before reaching out to me. So I'm gonna maybe give them a bit more attention than I would give someone who just says some generic platitude. One important thing when we talk about the experience section, don't just list your resume and say you are the founder of this company or that you went to Harvard or whatever. You should only really list your experience as it is relevant to your episode topic. So, because that's really the only thing that the host cares about. They want to know, like, if I like this topic and I have you on as a guest, can you speak intelligibly about this topic for a half hour or an hour? And so now I want to give an example of doing a cold outreach campaign, and we're going to use Postaga for this. So I have a few examples here. The first one being, here's me doing prospecting for digital agencies. And so if I was looking for, so in Postaga, if you haven't ever seen Postaga before, this is the Postaga platform. If you go to create a new campaign, if you sign up for Postaga, there are many different types of outreach campaigns that you can run. We have one that is specifically geared towards finding and pitching podcasts. And I'll enter a keyword and I can then find podcasts on that topic. And so I mentioned before targeting digital agencies. Let's say I'm focusing on lawyers, for marketing for them, just as an example. If I'm searching for digital agencies, I'm going to be getting podcasts that are geared towards growing digital agencies and people who provide services for them. And so that's the kind of podcast that we're going to encounter here. And you can see in Postaga, I get like a link to these sites so I could check out any of these podcasts. I could see when their last episode was and how many episodes total they have published. But also, importantly, I get these skipped podcasts. So Postaga lets me know, hey, this particular podcast hasn't published a brand new episode in over 3 months. So as the other example, focusing on marketing podcasts, I'm getting marketing-oriented podcasts. And I can see how many episodes they've published. I can see kind of their pitch of what their podcast is all about. And let's take the lawyer one as the example. So when I'm doing my prospecting, I'm just going to choose a few specific podcasts that look like they're going to be relevant to me. If I'm doing marketing, like I said, for lawyers, I'll pick those. And then going to the next step, Postaga is going to try and find the right people at these websites. And it'll also let us know if we've reached out to people at these domains before. And as an example here, Postaga is trying to find, well, who's the person we should reach out to at this site? Postaga will automatically try and find that person using integration we have looking through LinkedIn. But if it doesn't find the right person, we have links to their about pages or their team pages, and we can see who works at these firms. Great. And I might want to reach out to them. So next up, what's going to happen is Postaga is going to find and verify, very important, email addresses for these people. So we can make sure that when we actually reach out to them, that we know that we know that it's going to land in someone's inbox and not just bounce, which if you have emails that bounce enough in large enough quantity, it's going to be bad for your deliverability overall and bad for your domain. So like if you have a lot, if you have like a high bounce rate, like, I don't know, like 10% or so, that's very bad. And that can happen if you have unverified emails and you're just, trying to see, oh, well, I got an email here, or I'm using some other tool that there are a lot of prospecting tools out there, and a lot of them have old data. So it might give you someone's email address who's no longer with a company, since people change jobs as they do. And if you email them, then it bounces, and that will enough of that, and your email service provider will be thinking that you are sending spam and then send your emails in the future to spam folders. So once we've got this, we can choose an email sequence. I've got a podcast sequence, and I can show you kind of what it looks like here. We've got an email template library in Postaga that you can use that we have podcast templates good to go. But what you'll do is you'll create a sequence that includes several emails going out over the course of a period of time. And so in this one, it's insert, the first name automatically inserts here. I've got topic ideas, and here's why I would be a good fit. And these will be customized specifically for this campaign. And so I can use this email sequence over and over again for every podcast related outreach campaign I do, but I'll tailor it to the particular types of podcasts that I have. And so in this next screen here, I can see here are all the podcasts I want to reach out to. Oh, one other tip here, make sure that like this company name, this is going to be the podcast name, any like extraneous text, delete it. Because it'll like look like, hey, I'm a big fan of your council to council dash something 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 podcast. It just it looks like, computer generated. And if I have one that's all caps, I'm gonna edit that as well. And then as far as the topics go, I personally did a little bit of very, very, very basic HTML in here to get bullet points for the podcast topics and for the guest pitch. And I'll show you how that looks. And so in the preview here in this next page, I can see what the emails are going to look like for every individual. For all of them, these are all for lawyer-focused podcasts. They're going to get the same exact pitch, except for any merge fields that are geared towards them individually, like their name or their podcast name. And so as you'll see here, I've got, these are all personalized to them. I've got the same topics and experience pitching them, but except I'm personalizing like their names and their podcast names. And then I can send these follow-ups. And then once I'm happy with all of that, I can schedule these campaigns to go out. I can choose who I'm sending these emails from, or if I'm testing. One thing that we do is we make sure that we don't send out the emails on weekends, and that we stop the follow-up sequence when we get replies to our first emails. And that is the basic workflow of how I do any podcast outreach. But now I want to talk a bit more about what we do after. So if you have any questions about that workflow, please feel free to drop those in the Q&A, and I promise you we'll get to those. But next up, what's going to happen when you start doing this outreach? Well, there's a variety of things that might happen. The most common response I get is, this sounds good. Here is our scheduler. Let's set something up and let's record an episode. Some hosts will reply with something like asking if you've been on other podcasts and you have examples of your experience. That's more often the case with larger audience podcasts. They want to make sure that you have like a good setup and you sound good and you sound intelligent, and that they can ensure that the quality will be good. But if it's a smaller podcast, less likely that they might ask this. One thing is you might want to have not canned responses, but like go-to answers for common questions like these. Like, do you have, like, for the podcast, they're going to want a 2 to 3 sentence bio to include in the show notes, or to read off as they introduce you on the podcast. Have that ready to go. Do you have a high res headshot that you can share? That this is almost always something that a podcast asks for. And then sharing your info about you, your website, your social handles. Do you also have a podcast? Some things that and then it's not a deal breaker if you don't have a podcast. I don't have a podcast and I've been on 50 something podcasts, but the hosts will ask this because, well, some of them are looking to promote themselves as well, and they might want to do a podcast swap. Speaking of, if you have your own podcast, that might be something good to mention in your pitch as well, as kind of like a sweetener for all this. Maybe you want to offer a podcast swap, like, hey, I saw your podcast and we target a similar audience. I wanted to see if you'd be interested in doing a podcast swap. Here's me and my background and what I qualified to talk about. Want to see what you think. And that can be also more likely to get a good response from the recipient as well. And one other question that I get is, how can you promote this podcast once it's live? Some podcasts will, a few podcasts in the history of me ever doing outreach to podcasts has been, how big is your email list or your social following, where they really want you to help them build the podcast by sharing it with your audience. And whether you have a large audience of subscribers or social followers or not, I would always honestly express your ability to, share the podcast when it's live, like, because so I thank them for having you on. You're happy to share the podcast with your audiences as well, whether it's tweeting it or posting it on LinkedIn or anything like that once it's live. The hosts really appreciate that. Now let's talk about some common mistakes. One common one is reaching out to dead podcasts. They haven't published an episode in years. They'll respond. If they even respond, they'll say, like, clearly you don't know anything about my podcast because we haven't had an episode in years and I'm not about to revive it to do a one-off episode now. Another thing is not having a specific enough pitch. Like, if you have a very general broad topic, like, I want to come on and talk about marketing, you're making more work for the host because now they need to take you and come up with a topic that fits within their audience. And for them, it's going to be much easier for them just to say, no thanks, and wait for someone else to pitch them a specific topic that is relevant for their audience, so the host doesn't have to do that work. This one is a super, super common one. Every time I go on a podcast, I ask the host, why did you have me on? And they often say to the effect of, you gave me everything I needed. You gave me very specific episode ideas that were relevant to my audience. You told me why you can speak about them. Often I get a pitch from either a company or a PR agency, and it's basically to the effect of, here is this person, our CEO. They would be a great guest for you. Here is their resume. They went to Harvard, whatever. That's not helpful for the host, because then we're in that situation where the host has to now, if they want to even work with them, figure out, how am I going to put this person on an episode? And that just makes more work for them. Another one is kind of not being prepared with the answers to these common questions. Before you even do your first pitches to podcasts, I would come up with an answer doc which just has those things ready to go: the bio, the headshot, the social handles, website links, stuff like that. That way you can respond quickly if the host asks you these questions. And the other thing is not following up. If you don't follow up, you only get one chance to get on this podcast. If you follow up, you have 2 or 3 chances to get their attention and get a response. So once you're actually accepted to be on this podcast, how can you ensure your appearance is good? First thing, make sure you have good internet connection. If you have Wi-Fi or if you have wireless internet, make sure you're in a good spot wherever you are going to be recording. There's nothing worse than a connection that drops out that really just messes with the quality, and the host doesn't want to have to publish an episode where it keeps cutting out because it's just the listener is going to drop off if they can't understand you. Another thing is having a good microphone is super helpful. You don't have to get a several $100 microphone or $100 microphone even, but having a decent microphone helps. I would not recommend headset microphones. I would not recommend, generally, I wouldn't recommend AirPods. I wouldn't recommend the onboard microphone that's on your computer. Those generally have a lot of echo and capture the whole room. The first thing, the least expensive option I would recommend would be like a USB microphone, like the Blue brand Snowball, which I think is around $50. There's also the Blue Yeti, which is around $100. And then if you want to get a little crazier, there are XLR microphones, so microphones that plug into like a studio microphone that will plug into an interface or something like that, and that plugs into your computer and changes that signal from XLR to USB or whatever. But one other last recommendation is the brand is Audio Technica. It's a USB microphone. It's under $100. I think it's ATR 2100X. Also a really, really good microphone. Many podcasts, not everyone, but many of them will record the video and either use it for clips for LinkedIn, or they may be publishing it to YouTube. So no matter what, I would recommend showing up prepared for there to be video recorded. A lot of podcasts will record the video and may not use any of it, but just in case, make sure that where you are recording from looks decent. One question that I often ask podcast hosts, I ask them 2 things when I'm going on a podcast. One, are you recording video? If not, perfect. That lets me know that I don't have to have the best setup and backdrop. And the second question is, are you editing this at all, or do you record straight and then publish it? And the reason I ask that is because, sometimes we flub a line or mess up when we say things and need to start over. It happens. But if you know that the podcast is going to say just go through it, then you know that you need to keep going and don't pause and start over. But if they are editing, then you can make sure that then you know that, okay, if I don't love how this is coming out, I want to stop this and redo. Eliminate distractions on your computer and wherever you are recording from. Turn off your sound, anything that makes a sound or vibration notifications, whether it's Slack or Microsoft Teams or your email or your phone. Eliminate those distractions as best you can. And come prepared knowing what you're going to talk about and having done your research. If this is the first time that you're talking about a particular topic, I would recommend making notes with like bullet points of the things that you want to make sure to cover when you talk about this particular topic, so that you don't skip over anything, or if in the excitement you get off track, this can kind of recenter you and get you back on track. And another thing that the host will really appreciate is once the episode is live, make sure to promote the podcast, share it with your audiences, you know, share it with your email list, or at the very least, your LinkedIn or Twitter or social followers. Some bonus tips that I want to mention. First thing, one thing that can be nice for a podcast host is ask if they're looking for other guests for future episodes. If so, you might know someone who might be a good fit. I've had hosts ask me, "Hey, if you know anyone who's a good fit, please share with me them their share them with me and share me the info." And at a certain point, I've kind of come prepared with this, and so I usually ask this at the end of the recording. Um, are you looking for new guests? If so, I have a few that I might recommend might be a good fit. Let me know, and I'm happy to share them with you. And then you're providing that additional value to the host, and also you're potentially doing a favor for a colleague or a friend by getting them that exposure on a podcast, and maybe in the future they could do the same for you. Beyond that, ask for a referral from the host. If you are trying to do a podcast tour, one thing that is super can be super helpful is at the the conclusion of recording the episode, you can ask, "Hey, I'm looking to do a podcast tour to promote my brand, and hopefully you enjoyed working with me today on this episode recording. I had a great time. I wanted to see, is there any other podcast that maybe you have other colleagues that you might think we would be a good fit for? I'd always be happy to get an introduction." And a lot of podcast hosts tend to know other podcast hosts, just because it's a pretty small community, and especially in a particular niche. One other nice bonus is if you want to do a good job of being able to track where your visitors are coming from, um, giving like at towards the end of the episode, when the host will always ask you, if people want to find out more information about you, where can they find you? Throw in a coupon code that you might create for the podcast and say like, yeah, our website is this, and if you want to check us out and get 25% off your first month of our service, use this coupon, this podcast 25 or something like that. And this way you can have this data tied in to know, all right, this podcast generated this sale or this lead for us. So next up, that concludes the majority of what we're talking about today, and soon we're going to get to Q&A. But a few last words. First thing, if you haven't yet, we have a Facebook group called Grow Together SEO. It's all about cold outreach for link building, SEO, digital PR, podcasts, and the like. If you need any help with doing outreach for podcasts or anything else, please feel free to ask us. We are always happy to help and brainstorm ideas. Every Friday, most every Friday, we do an open office hours session, and that's at postaga.com/weekly-office-hours, where you can sign up to join in, and we can take a look at any outreach campaigns that you're doing or just discuss and strategize. We're happy to do that. And lastly, if you are interested in doing outreach, whether it's for podcasts or recruiting affiliates or link building or anything like that, and you just don't have the time, we offer a done for you outreach service here at Postaga at postaga.com/done for you. And basically we run outreach campaigns on behalf of your company, or if you're an agency, we can do it on behalf of your clients. We do it for a variety of use cases. As one example, getting podcast guest spots. We also do it for link building, guest blogging, recruiting affiliates to promote your products, getting press coverage, and depending on the business, potentially sales lead generation as well. So I guess before we jump to the Q&A, a quick last poll of the day. Would you like to get a follow-up from me after this webinar concludes? And if you haven't answered yet, drop in your response, and then we will get into some Q&A. I'll leave this open for 10 more seconds. If you haven't thrown in a response to the poll yet, please do so. You have 10 seconds left. 9, 8, 7. All right, 3, 2, 1, and I'm going to close out the poll now. Thanks for those responses. And next up, that will otherwise conclude the majority of our session today on how to get podcast guest spots. I hope this was super helpful for you for thinking about the right way to go about finding and pitching podcasts, as well as what to do when you've booked those appearances. And next up, we're going to go to some Q&A. And so if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them either in the Q&A section here or in the chat. All right, so a few questions we have. So do you know of a good podcast about LinkedIn marketing? From Dan. So the question is, do you know of a good podcast about LinkedIn marketing? I guess the kind of question I want to throw back at you is this, are you interested in a podcast on LinkedIn marketing because you are doing LinkedIn marketing? Because my thought is, if so, the podcast host themselves probably are some sort of expert in LinkedIn marketing. And if you pitch them to come talk to their audience about LinkedIn marketing, they're not going to want to have you on as a guest because you're going to be stealing their thunder since they are experts in LinkedIn marketing. Instead, I would probably, if you are an expert in LinkedIn marketing specifically, I would probably focus on podcasts that are either geared towards either businesses to learn about marketing broadly, or specifically geared towards maybe like if you have a niche specific target audience, reaching out to like that, like I mentioned before, if we're talking about marketing for lawyers, or we want to reach out to not marketing podcasts but lawyer focused podcasts. And so if your area of expertise is LinkedIn marketing, your target audience, I'm guessing, is B2B, so other businesses, you want to find where businesses are trying to learn about either marketing or growth or really anything. And so I would target those kinds of podcasts. And for that, you can absolutely use the search engine built into Postaga. All right. Next question I got. In Canada, we can't email people, pitch them without their permission. How do you get around that? So here's where we talk about email sending laws and things like that. The US has CAN spam, the EU has GDPR, and Canada has its own as well. In general, the consensus across the board, and the EU is the most restrictive, is that you cannot, well, for one, you cannot cold outreach to individuals that are, well, one, you can't cold reach out to individuals that are like not associated with the business. But for people that you're reaching out to at a business, you can reach out to them if you have a legitimate business purpose. And so if you have done your due diligence and your prospecting, you can reach out and you are pitching them specifically because they are a podcast host and you have an episode that you think would be a good fit for their audience. That's generally considered permissible. And so with people who are doing, and so more broadly, if you're doing cold outreach, this kind of requirement that like the EU has with the GDPR, which is more restrictive than US's can spam, basically you have to have some sort of specific legitimate business purpose when you're doing the outreach here. You can't, meaning that you can't just broadly target an email list of 1 million people that hasn't been vetted in some way, that you haven't that you don't know who any of these people are. That's not permissible. And so that's why the GDPR has that kind of legitimate business purpose requirement there. And as far as like the US goes, there's the can spam law, which is not as restrictive about like who you're sending to as the EU GDPR is. The only requirements different in the US can spam is that you have to have an address, like a physical address, which is why like we mentioned Postaga, like in your footer, you should have an email or a physical address, or whether it's a business address or a PO box or something like that. And the last thing is you have to have a way for people to opt out if you're emailing them cold, whether it is an opt-out link or just a piece of messaging that says, if you don't want to hear from me again, let me know, and or say stop and I will not follow up. And that's generally considered sufficient. If there are, don't think we have any more questions for now, but and we're about to hit the hour here, so I want to be mindful of everyone's time. So following up, I will absolutely send out the recordings, which will come within 24 hours. If you, which will, yeah, the recording of this will be out in 24 hours. I'll also have a copy of the slides to share. And if you want to talk about done for you cold outreach, obviously always open to talk about that. And the office hours are every Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern. And I will send a sign up link for that as well. Thanks for reminding me about that, Ian. And that'll conclude our time today. Thanks everyone for joining. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate these great questions and the interactivity. This was a lot of fun. Happy to talk about you. Happy to talk with you about all this. This was a lot of fun. Have a great day.